All right, good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to B-Sides. This specifically is the ground floor track. So today I have the honor of introducing Uriel, who'll be going ahead and talking about malware analysis, the Red Team edition. Before we do that, of course, I have a couple of those little announcements to give real quick. So first, we'd like to start with thanking our sponsors who are responsible for making all this happen. Without them, we literally couldn't be here doing what we do. We'd like to especially thank our diamond sponsors, LastPass and Palo Alto Networks, and our gold sponsors, Amazon, FlexTrack, and Google. It's their support along with our other sponsors, donors, and volunteers that make this event possible. These talks are being streamed live, and they are being recorded and will be posted on YouTube, so there is no need for you to take photos or videos of the presentation. We ask that you try to silence your cell phones, keep them in your pockets. As a reminder, our policy as photographs is that if you do take a photograph, you should have permission for anybody who's in the shot. We're very sensitive to being photographed. Some presenters and or members of the community prefer to stay anonymous. So please remember that as you're taking photos around the conference. Also, I'd like to remind you, if we're going to do question and answers afterwards, please step up and use the microphone. It's not so much for us in the room or for the presenter, but it's being recorded so that those who watch it later can hear your question clearly as it's being asked. So. All right, with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over and say there it is. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for introducing me. So first of all, cheers. Give yourself a round of applause, please. Oh, come on, open up. So first of all, cheers. Good old Hennessy, cognac. So first of all, my name is Uriel Kosayev. Thank you for presenting me. First, words of appreciation. Before we going to start with our presentation, want to thank, first of all, I want to thank God and my mom, of course, because if not for them, I will not be here. I want to thank B-Sides for making this amazing conference. And of course, thank you, amazing audience. Thank you for being here. So let's get started. So, I like my talks and my presentation be less about talks and more about doing and more about practical stuff. Like, you know, we'll do a couple of demos. So I'll first introduce what I will show you in the demo so you'll have some interest. The first demo will be about the dark side ransomware and how you can, as a red teamer, learn from it, and basically how you can take the same concepts and kind of implement them in your own malware you develop. And another demo which I'll introduce how to implement some of the antivirus bypass techniques in your own malware in order to basically evade antivirus and EDR software. And my goal in this presentation, this talk, is basically for you to open up your mind, to be fluid, not to be rigid, and basically help security grow and become better. So basically, let's get started. So this talk is not only for red teamers, it's for everyone, but the aim is specifically more about red teamers. But again, anyone can learn from it, take the concepts, take the tools, and you know, implement it. So I want you to learn malware analysis. Now, what the heck a red teamer want to know about malware analysis? Like, why? Any red teamer has its own tools, his own C2, his own thing. And eventually, you know, most of the people that are red teamers are, you know, more about infrastructure penetration testing or, you know, Active Directory and stuff like this. But in the end of the day, most of the adversaries or the attackers will go for your data, okay? They will write ransomware, they will write some info stealers, they will use mostly malware. So if you want to become a stronger red teamer and a better security researcher, you need to learn malware analysis. And not only for the sake of malware analysis, but for the sake of offensive security. So a little bit about me. My name is Uriel Kosayev. I'm the book author of Antivirus Bypass Techniques. Basically, the book presents you 10 practical techniques which you can implement in your own tools and will help you to bypass basically any antivirus, any EDR. And of course, this book also provides some security recommendations that you can use in order to develop better antivirus and do better detection engineering and stuff like this. I'm also the founder of Malware Analysis Co., which is basically a website that gives you all the necessary information you need for malware analysis, like tools, cheat sheets, stuff like this. You also have my courses there. I provided courses like basic malware analysis, advanced reverse engineering, and other stuff like malware development. Basically, I like to do malware research and other security-related topics. I'm also the red team tech leader of the biggest company, like the biggest beer company in the world, called AB InBev. Just a small disclaimer, I'm not talking in behalf of AB InBev, I'm talking in behalf of myself, but just for you to know. Also YouTuber, blogger, lecturer. One of my biggest passions actually is to teach students and give them the knowledge and give them tools to become better security professionals and also to enter this field. So I'm doing this for something like 10 years in Israel, around the world also. And it's a great honor for me also to stand here. So before the show begins, what the heck is malware analysis? I like to define things very shortly without all the Wikipedia mumbo jumbo stuff, you know. So malware analysis basically is the art of analyzing and research of malicious software behavior and patterns. And by researching malicious behaviors and patterns, you can learn a lot from them for the sake of blue teaming, like detecting malware, extracting indicators of compromise, understanding the TTPs and all this stuff. But also, as a reteamer, you can learn a lot from those malware, from their techniques, from their bypass stuff, how they obfuscate their strings, how they use their malware, how they actually literally move in your network. So it's analyzing malware is like getting into the head of the author of this malware. It's like reading a book, you know? For me, it's like reading a book. I think it's even better than Mozart. Yeah, most of people don't really like to reverse engineer assembly and sing all this mumbo jumbo stuff, but for me, it's actually an art. So the levels of malware analysis. So the basic level is you can basically take a malware sample, if it's an executable file, PowerShell script, whatever, you can throw it inside a sandbox, which is basically a virtualized environment with all the necessary tools to analyze the malware. And basically you have things like AnyRun or hybrid analysis, which are basically you can take a file, throw it into the sandbox, and it will give you like the overview of what the malware actually and how it's executed and all this stuff. Of course, if there is malware with anti-sandbox and other evasion techniques, most likely it will not be executed on the sandbox. So it's kind of limited, but it can give you a good overview of what the malware does and also helping you to extract indicators of compromise. The next level is called static analysis. It is basically taking a file, extracting strings, understand the building blocks of the file before you actually execute it on your sandbox environment or your virtualized machine, okay? You have dynamic analysis, which is basically to execute a malware on your virtual machine, to see how it behaves, use tools like Procmon, Process Explorer, API Monitor, understand what kind of Windows API functions are executed, and all this kind of stuff. And of course, the most amazing stuff that most people are, I think, frightened of is reverse engineering. It's like, god damn, get into the assembly code or whatever it is and understand how the malware is actually work. So it's kind of interesting. For example, if your malware opens a socket and interacts with an external server or C2, how it actually do it? Okay, what kind of Windows API function it uses? How can I use it for detection engineering? How can I re-implement it in my own malware, in my own red teams, in my own attacks? You know, for example, whenever you want to interact over HTTP with some external server, you can use various Windows API functions. You can use this socket, you can use internet open URL, and you have all kind of bunch of other API functions. Okay, so this is only a small fraction, a small example for you to understand what you can do with the power and knowledge of malware analysis. So we talked about malware analysis, blah blah blah, what it is, what is the level, all this kind of stuff. So first of all, cheers. Another sip. Ah, amazing. So, what is red teaming? You know, you will ask someone, and they'll say you, oh, it's it's the knowledge of using or the use of tools like Metasploit and Cobalt Strike and do that and do this but like what is the essence? What is the goal of red teaming? Like actually. So, first of all, red teaming is not about achieving a DA, domain admin. And you know what? Let me tell you another thing. Most of the attackers and most of the malware doesn't even care about getting a domain admin. You know why? Because most of the networks today are very, very hard to manage their permissions and their security. It's very hard to be a blue teamer. It's very hard to like literally implement security controls in the right way. So even a ransomware today can encrypt your document files without having local admin or even a domain admin. So what the hell it needs a domain admin? So most of the times malware or attackers will go for domain admins if it's really necessary for them, like to literally move between forests through other networks or just for the fun of it. Yeah. So red teaming is about simulating real world threats. Now what the heck is a real world threat? Doesn't running crack map exec with Metasploit, with all the Cobalt Strike, Mambo Jumbo stuff is actually red teaming? It's the tools, it's not the essence of it. So the purpose of red team is to provide a real world picture of business related threats. Like for example, if you're a pharmacy business, maybe your adversary will not be Conti or Reveal. It will be maybe another pharmacy company. I don't know. Maybe another competitor. Maybe some insider threat. I don't know. And basically you need to define as a red teamer what is an actual threat to your company that you're trying to red team. Another purpose is to act like the adversary or the enemy based on accurate threat intelligence and of threat actors targeting your business. So the use of threat intelligence will help you to become more aware of what kind of threat actors and TTPs you actually need to simulate in order to give the real picture of the security posture of the company. Simulate potential threats, actors, TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Okay, it's like understanding the tactics, the techniques they're using. Maybe the threat actors using Mimikatz to dump LSAs. Maybe they created their own version of Mimikatz with different API functions, which most of EDRs doesn't really even detect them. I don't know. And based on these data, like the TTPs, you can actually go and do your stuff. For example, if you have threat actors like Conti, which they are basically a ransomware group, I hate them, of course. They attacked a couple of my clients also, but you know, the world is hard. But if you understand that Conti is actually targeting your business and you understand their TTPs, you can go and simulate the threats on the company you're attacking. Of course, in a secure manner. So always take OPSEC into your mind when you're doing red teaming. And eventually, the real goal of red teams is not to go to blue team and say, yeah, you failed, or be childish, I win you and I overcome you and all this kind of bullshit, you know. The real purpose of red team is to help organizations become better. That's it. And of course, helping the blue team become better. So if you as a red teamer understand the craft, the techniques, the tools that the blue team uses, and also if the blue team understand how the red team is operates, they can basically help each other. So red teamer must have an adversarial mindset. This is for sure. You cannot be a red teamer if you don't know how to think like your enemy, like a criminal, okay? Like a bad guy. But Mama always said, like, told us to stay away from bad guys, you know? Oh, so sweet, man. I like my mom, and she has amazing tips for life, and she's even right. But not in the case of red team. You actually need to think like your enemy, and it's kind of hard, like psychologically, not only technically. So to know your enemy, you must become your enemy. I know it's kind of hard to do it, but if your skills of mimicking others and to be like to mimic others basically and to understand their psychology, it will be much easier for you to do this. Now behold the real power of red teaming. Cobalt Strike. No, don't take it seriously. Like Cobalt Strike, Cobalt Strike is an amazing tool, you know? It's an amazing tool. It has a GUI. It has a lot of features, bypass evasion modules. It does amazing job, okay? So take it in the right perspective. But mostly when you talk to red teamers, they are about the tools, like red team, Cobalt Strike, my man. You're not a red teamer without Cobalt Strike. You need to have Cobalt Strike. Nah, I don't agree. I don't agree. It's just one of the best tools out there, I think, but it's not what actually defines a red teamer. So why not doing things like this? Now, in the left you have Cobalt Strike. In the right you have IDA Pro. Personally, I like to smoke when I doing reversing. Kind of cool, and you know, opens your mind. What for me represents the right picture, like IDA, is like go and understand your own tools. Go and understand your own techniques. Go and understand other adversaries' techniques and tools and malware. Go and research stuff. Like someone asked me like 5 years ago, you know what is Mimikatz? And I'm like, I think so. Mimikatz, this dumb tool, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what this and that command does? And it's like, whatever, dumps the else's memory. Okay. And it's like, yeah, nah, nah, nah. And then I asked him, you know what? How do you actually understand how it works? You know, when you're asking someone, what is something? Do you know about something? So what is the actual level of understanding of this question? Like, for example, Mimikatz. What is the level of understanding of this tool? How do you actually know how it operates? How it acts? What kind of functions it uses? In what languages it was written and compiled? Do you? Or you just go, grab the tools, execute them, and you're a red teamer? Which, to be honest, most of the time, it's working. It's like, not maybe Mimikatz, but other tools, you know? But in order for you to become a better red teamer or a stronger security professional, go and try to understand how this tool operates. Like, go do some Wireshark, like, understand how the network packets are going on, like, understand how the tool you are using, for example, Mimikatz, to dump LSAS, what's actually doing, like, opening a handle to the LSAS process, enumerating the PIDs of the processes, receiving a handle with the open process Windows API function, use of the mini dump function to actually dump the LSAS. And after you actually understand this functionality, you can think maybe there's other functions or Windows API functions that I can use, which most likely most EDRs and antivirus will not detect it. So it will open up for you a greater world. Now don't get me wrong. Both malware analysis and red teaming are not about the tools one is using, but the ability to research and understand technical and abstract concepts, eventually. So I think you kind of understand why malware analysts need to concern red teamers, okay? But one of the reasons is because the bad guys do. They go and learn from each other's malware, from each other tools, from each other techniques, and they actually go and re-implement the same techniques, the same tools, or the same concept basically in their own malware. For example, if you heard about the LogBit3 ransomware, also did a video about them, they literally got the code from DarkSide ransomware, copied some snippets from it for the decryption, runtime decryption mechanisms, and for dynamic API resolve, which we'll talk about it. And they literally copy and paste the same technique, the same concept in their own malware. It's like, what the hell? I'm like researching the LogBit ransomware, and it's like 50%, like minimum 50% the code of DarkSide. So if the bad guys go and learn from other malware and other tools, why not the red teamers, the good guys? So threat actors evolve by learning and leveraging the craft, and TTPs by researching malware samples in the wild. This is one of their secrets, but not anymore. I hope this talk will actually open your mind and give you the necessary tools and necessary mindset to become a better security professional. So let's talk about quickly about the malware development lifecycle, like the MDLC, I call it. It's like SDLC for software development lifecycle, but for malware, which is kind of the same. So you have malware development, you develop your malware, you know, the malware need to check in which kind of environment it actually resides, whether it's Linux, Windows, what kind of version, what is the MAC address, the IP address, what's so-called information gathering or situational awareness. So the malware need to be aware of where is actually it. And then based on this information, which most likely be sent to an external C2 server, the malware will receive the configuration or the next stage of execution. So part of malware development, like any other software development, is to test and do QA. Like, go and develop your malware in a secure manner. Of course, for good purposes and not for bad purposes. Don't be a black hat, be a white hat, you know. It's kind of cool because, for example, if you want to learn C and assembly and doing this via developing malware, it's much cooler than developing the checkmate or snake game. This my opinion, okay? Then you want to implement some malware defense bypass techniques inside your malware. Like, most likely if your malware will drop in one of the computers or networks that you're targeting, there will be some endpoint protections that you want to bypass, like DLP, EDRs, antivirus, stuff like this. Then you want to actually do some offline AV and EDR testing before you're actually distributing the malware. And then, it's one of the things that I want to talk about today, is IOC collection and removal. Like, it's fine that you actually developed your own malware, you use C or Python or PowerShell, whatever language that you want, but after you compile your malware, like with Visual Studio or with C++ or with GCC or whatever compiler is out there, how the file is actually look like for the EDR, for the antivirus, for the malware analyst, for the researcher. Does the strings that you actually used or the variable names or the function names or any other IP addresses that you used in your own malware, they actually presented in your malware like in clear text? Do you need to obfuscate them? Maybe one compiler compiled it in a one way, and another compiler compiled your malware in a different way, which will be much harder for malware analysts and EDRs to detect. So if you compile, for example, a C-written malware in Visual Studio, it will be basically a different output if you compile it in, for example, GCC compiler, okay? So it's basically a research topic for you if you want to kind of test, write a malware, try to actually compile it with different compilers and see the difference. Do some diffs strings, opcode differentiation. See how it actually the compiled versions are differs from each other. Okay? And then, for example, if you have some malicious or suspicious IOC presented in your compiled malware, you want to kind of like somehow remove it, obfuscate, encrypt it, or whatever. And of course, as a white hat hacker or whatever, you want to use the same like techniques and IOCs used there, and like work together with the threat intelligence and like try to understand how they are actually relevant to other malware in the wild or other threat groups. Basically, you do not have to develop your malware from zero. And this is one of the things that basically I want to say here. You can learn from real-world malware samples and incidents. For example, you can go for the Colonial Pipeline incident, if you remember, the same incident that actually broke half of the gas stations in the United States. It was actually the dark side ransomware, like a small piece of executable disturbed and crashed half of the gas stations in the United States, something like this. I'm not really exact on the numbers, but something like this. So what one executable file, one ransomware can do to your state, not only for a company, think about it, and how much can be learned from this ransomware. And I also want to dive with you into this ransomware. Like, I don't have all the time in the world, but we'll do something simple there. So, let's talk about dark side ransomware, CKNIDE, runtime code decryption, and dynamic API resolve. Now, don't get creepy on me, please. It's going to be kind of deep technical stuff, like assembly stuff. I'll try to explain it in a simple fashion. And let's begin. So let me just start my virtual machine here. So what do we have here? Let me just do. Can you see something here? Like this, maybe? Yeah. So we have the dark side sample. Yeah, the same malware that disturbed half of the United States gas stations. So if I open this file inside PE Bearer, for example, I want to see the sections and imports, like the actual sections you have in the executable files and the imported functions. Now, just remember, analyzing malware is like reading a book, and each book has its own sections. Like, you know, it has a title, it has the data in the title, and so on. So you can see here we have two text sections. Now, most of normal files will have one text section. The text section actually contains the execution code, like the machine code, the assembly code that is need to be actually executed on your CPU, on your operating system. And then you have another section called text1, you know, kind of weird. Now, in most files, even most malware, if you go to the imports, you will see much larger DLL entries. And for each DLL, you see at least 5 to 10 imported functions. And you can see where I'm going. You have only one DLL, kernel 32 DLL, one of the most basic and mostly used DLLs in Windows. And have only one function called exit process? Like, what the hell? Like a normal malware or normal file will include more DLLs, like socket and, you know, create file, create process, you know, like basic stuff. And here you have only one function? What the hell? So, if you open up the malware inside IDA Pro and go again to imports, you will see exit process also only present here. And basically, this is the starting point from where the malware actually begins. Now, this is not the actual function names, okay? So this is the function names that I call, okay? So each call here in assembly is basically calling to a function. So for example, you define a function in C, like for example, void blah blah, and it has two parameters. So this is what we have. So you have here basically two parameters, which are basically an encrypted blob. You have basically an encrypted mumbo jumbo stuff here. And this call mumbo jumbo stuff will do something, then do another something, and eventually go and decrypt those encrypted blobs. Now, if I'll do space here, I'll see that the actual code here is under the text1 section that we saw, which is not very normal. And eventually, if I go here to like, for this call where shit show begins, where it's actually where the ransomware start to encrypt your computer, if you go here, it's like gibberish, nothing. What the hell? So, if I double click, you can see here we have the text section. So it's kind of occurs to me that the decrypted blob will be placed in the actual text section. So this mumbo jumbo stuff will be eventually decrypted and be an actual code to analyze. So we have basically we have to execute the ransomware on my virtual machine. So be careful with it. Let's begin. So basically, I'll go and put a breakpoint here and start the local Windows debugger. Whoa. Okay, so now it got to the breakpoint. So now the actual code is here. So we did whatever stuff it does here. Then we do F8 to actually execute the function. Now, just for understand what kind of decryption it uses here, if you go double click on this function, it calls this function, which I call decryption festival, which actually go and call another function, and eventually it will do XOR blah blah. So it will basically XOR the values and in that way decrypt the content. Okay, so let's do F8. I hate this computer. Okay, and another F8. And now we'll need to see something like different here. So before I actually go inside this code, let me just undefine it in IDA and reanalyze it again. Because for IDA, it's kind of like hard to understand what is going on then. So if I select here the code like this, I go and do like analyze selected area or C, analyze, and I'll hope it will give something sensible. Okay. Here we have some things here. Let's do here C, where shit show begins. Amazing. Do another C. We kind of need to help IDA to reanalyze the code, basically. So now I'll go in F7, which is basically go into the function. Let me just also define it as a function, like with the P. Now I defined it as a function, and if now I can do space, and I will see everything in a fashionably mannered, execution flow. Okay. So basically, after the decryption has occurred, I undefined the data that I just kind of like got hard time to analyze, reanalyze it again, and using the P button in the keyboard, basically I define it as a function for IDA to understand that what is the actually building blocks. Cheers. Okay, so eventually it will go and call here two functions. This first function, the second one. So if I go to this function, it will do some weird things, which will basically eventually will resolve the APIs or the functions of the ransomware. So suddenly you will have some functions appear there. So Let's try to do F8 here, call the first function. As you can see, it resolved like a lot of DLLs. And now we got to actually resolve the functions also. So then I do another F8. And now you can see a lot of call blah blah something, call blah blah something, D word, whatever. It's actually a sign that is calling to the dynamically resolved IAT, the import address table, the actual functions of the DLLs which are resolved in runtime. Okay? So if I go into this call, or maybe to another call, like let me do, I hate this computer. And if I do now, for example, I'll do this call, I'll do F7, it will go actually and call shell32 command line argument. So this function didn't appear in the executable file. How did it actually now appear? So the two functions that I presented you here, they're actually doing what's so-called dynamic API resolve. Now, if you as a red teamer go and re-implement the same technique or the same concept in a different technique, you can evade most of the static engines in most of the EDRs and antivirus, and it's kind of easy to do it. Yeah. So, for the sake of, for our time, I'll go back to my slides. I actually have a ransomware running now on my virtual machine, and I don't give a hell about it, okay? Okay, so as we saw, no functions in the import address table. We can see that the sections are packed or encrypted. Okay, so you see there is a high entropy. Most likely if there is a higher value than 7, it will be most likely encrypted, encoded, or obfuscated. So, first, before it goes into actually resolving the APIs, it will do the decryption. So where I showed you the 2 decryption routines with the XOR stuff, this is where actually the XOR is made, and the text section is actually decrypted. And the dynamic API resolve, basically it takes both functions of load library, which literally loads a DLL file in runtime dynamically, and then it uses the get proc address. The get proc address function is like like load library and get proc address is like the brother and sister of resolving APIs or loading functions. The get proc address function will actually import the specific functions from the DLLs. And voila, you have the resolved functions in runtime. Yep.
There was some confusion as far as double booking the room. If you are looking for the 12 o'clock reverse engineering a DOS PC FM V game from 1994 by Andrew, it's now down in the proving ground. I'm sorry to have interrupted. Thank you.
It's fine, thank you. So we talked about, or I showed you actually how it looks like reversing a malware, or it's not always like this. If there, for example, malware like Agent Tesla or the Yashma ransomware, which I also have a YouTube video on it, you will see that the malware is actually compiled with C#, like .NET C#. I hate OOP languages. I hate them. But they're much easier to analyze because you don't need to actually analyze assembly, because .NET C# is a high-level language. It's called IL assembly. And if you put this executable, this compiled executable, into tools like dnSpy, it will literally decompile the code. You literally will see the source code of the malware. In C or C++ compiled malware, you will not see the actual source code. You will see the assembly. So IDA will do for you a disassembly, not decompile. So it's a different process. So now let's do some offensive stuff. Present you 2 bypass techniques. The first one is called rename obfuscation, and the second one is called memory bombing, which is my favorite. Again, they're referred also in my book, Antivirus Bypass Techniques. I'll be more than glad if you will read this book. So let's take a simple reverse shell. like the most basic stuff that red teamers and pen testers are like, reverse shell. So you have a C++ or C++ basically code here, which defines a main function. It receives 2 to 3 arguments. You define the IP that you want to call back or to communicate with, and the port of the C2 malicious whatever server. Okay, then it actually calls the function with the host and port, and you can kind of get where I'm getting at. Like, if you have a function named execute shell in your code, what is the probability that antivirus and EDRs will detect it? You know, think about it. So the function of execute shell basically takes 2 arguments, you know, the IP, the port, creates a socket, blah, 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 all the mumbo jumbo stuff, and, you know, defines the connection of IPv4 in this case, AFINet, and defines the receive of data, the buffer itself. Like whenever the Citrix server, as an attacker, you want to execute a command, it needs to send a command, and you need to receive the output in the server side. So this is the thing. So now we actually compile this malware or reverse shell, and now we'll start to look for IOCs. And again, not only like you literally switch your perspective to a blue teamer. Now we're acting like a blue teamer. This is the real power. Like, you're a red teamer, you're writing your malware, your whatever stuff you're doing, then you put the blue team hat and you're, okay, if I'm a blue team, how do I detect it? What kind of IOCs, artifacts I can find and rely on in order to create my detections with YAR or whatever detection language it uses. So if I do your strings on the executable and I'll use findstr in case sensitive on CMD, like findstr is like the lame version of grep in Windows, okay? I hate Windows, okay? And you have this CMD dot something, like where is the dot exe? One of the reasons you don't see the dot exe, it's because I used C++, which is a shitty language. I like C, but I hate C++ because it's OOP and also to reverse engineer C++ is much harder. And basically, you don't see cmd.exe because there is a null terminated string, not null terminated, like a /n in each one of the strings. For example, if you have IP like 192.168.0.1, you'll have in the strings 192.168, and then a new line 0 and 1. What the? C++, don't ask me, okay? So, if you're writing your malware in C++, it basically be better for you or easier for you to bypass rather than C, because C compiled executables are much easier to read. You literally see the strings, the variable names or whatever functions they're defined, and it's much easier to understand. Okay, so what now? So now I'll implement some rename obfuscation. So as you can see, it's the same code. I changed the function from execute shell, like shell, what the hell, to run. Generic name, run. Run what? Then you have host and port, which again, it can be benign. It doesn't have to be malicious, And in the code before, you saw that actually using create process with the cmd.exe, and it's like cmd.exe in one line. So I did a simple trick, I basically defined 2 char variables, cm and d.exe. And then I concatenated them together using strcat in C or C++, whatever, as a pointer variable, of course. And I passed this pointer variable to create process, to the Windows API create process function. And it basically changes things in a compiled version. Then you validate again the IOC removal. Yeah, where's the CMD dot something at? Gone. Poof. Got away. The second technique that I want to show you is memory bombing. I I think that I basically the first that named this technique as memory bombing. Not something new, but presented in my book. And it's very, it's very basic. Like the first technique used to bypass the static engine of antivirus and EDRs. This one is used for the dynamic engine. Like whenever you execute your malware or your executable, the dynamic engine of the antivirus or the EDR will basically allocate a protected virtualized memory, like virtual alloc or something like this. It will put the code inside this emulated environment or memory in your computer, and it will try to execute it. Now, as we all know, antivirus and EDRs has one problem, basically two problems. The fear of false positives, yeah, and the limitation of resources in your computer. Because think about it, antivirus and EDRs are reside in the same memory, in the same operating system, in the same computer. So of course they have some limitations. Now think about it. If I allocate enough large memory, like 8 megabytes, 20 megabytes, whatever, so the antivirus like looks in your mouth and said, "Oh man, it's too big for me. Move on." And it will let your malware execute. Because if there is any chance that it will terminate a legitimate process or a legitimate executable, big problem. And this is the same thing that I'm actually exploiting here. The fact that any antivirus and EDR has some resource limitation, and I'm allocating a big chunk of memory for him to choke out and let your malware execute. And now for the detection test results. Before the obfuscation and memory bombing is made, 35 detections. After the obfuscation and memory bombing has occurred, half down. Like more than 50%. It's a lot. Now, think about it. If I'll do things a little bit differently and I'll implement maybe even one or more bypass techniques, I will create a fully undetectable malware. 0 detections. Yeah? This is the reality we're living at. This is why you need to become a better security expert. This is why you need to understand both sides. Red team, blue team, whatever color you want to, purple team, yellow, all these colors. It's not about the colors. It's about the way you're working, the way you're thinking, the way you're approaching stuff. So for the sake of ending this presentation, some important tips for success. Always understand your tools and malware. Go as deeper as possible. Understand the IOCs generated in your compiled malware, the network packets, the actually used functions, everything that you can. Go as deep as possible. You will be surprised as what you will learn. The most learning experience I had in my whole offensive blah blah career is through doing the blue team stuff, incident response, forensics, malware analysis, like seeing the other side of things. You know what? I really appreciate blue teamers because it's a hell of a hard thing to do. And always the complaints are against the blue team, not the red team. It's kind of sad, but learn malware analysis to understand and think like a blue teamer. And again, malware analysis is not only for blue teamers, it's for red teamers. The bad guys do it. They analyze malware and they learn from each other. I actually showed you it with the dark side ransomware. And if you want, you can go to my YouTube video about LogBit3 ransomware and you kind of see the same code re-implemented there. Research malware to gain deeper knowledge and inspirations. Better understanding of operating systems, of coding, of everything. Follow the MDLC model. Malware development is like any other SDLC process. So write your malware in a good fashion. Like one of the malware I researched, like called Ardomax keylogger. I actually found a vulnerability there, which I exploited. DLL hijacking. Like if you have Ardomax keylogger in your computer and I'm another attacker and I want to persist or maybe even escalate privilege in your computer, I can exploit the same malware, the Ardomax keylogger, to reside in your computer. So it's kind of, So if it's very important for you for like OPSEC, operational security and everything, so securely code your malware. Yeah, I know it's kind of funny to say that, but yeah. Be curious, passionate, and innovative. I don't need to say this. And take some breaks in between. Don't work like a juggernaut. Take some breaks in between. Cooperation. Cooperate. Don't be a jackass. Yeah. If you want to do a real adversary simulation, red teaming, call it whatever you want, you need to cooperate with teams like threat intelligence. You need to, or do the threat intelligence for yourself and understand what is the actual value you provide your company based on the actual threats posed on your company. And eventually take your report, the adversary simulation you did or the red teaming, work with the blue team and gain a better security and monitoring. Again, think like fluid water, not like a rigid rock. Think and operate like a criminal. Help security grow and become better. If you want to have some more resources, some more fun, more learning experience, you can go into Malware Analysis Co. You don't have to take my courses. Do whatever you want. You can learn for yourself. But you can use the resources, the cheat sheets, everything is, most of the things are for free, basically. My website is like an index. You have everything there, whatever you need. If you have some suggestions of things that you think I may add to the website, feel free to contact me in my Twitter or whatever. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. You're an amazing audience. Any questions? Yeah. Can you go just for the microphone, they asked? Yeah. Questions. Cheers.
In terms of sandbox analysis, now that Cuckoo's kind of been not updated in a very long time, I saw on your site you have a bunch of sandboxes listed, but most of them
Can you be close to the microphone? Don't yeah.
Okay, testing.
Amazing.
All right. On your website, I saw you listed a bunch of sandboxes. Yeah. I used to use Cuckoo when I used to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They haven't updated that in forever. The sandboxes you listed, I see a lot of them are like paid solutions. Is there anything you can still run locally, similar to how Cuckoo used to be, where you could step into a process and interactively, like make a change, like click on a link or something or a button, and then go back and get your analysis at the end?
Yeah.
That's not like running the cloud. Because if I'm dealing with very sensitive data, I don't necessarily trust the company that says they'll keep it private. I want to keep everything local.
Okay, thank you for the question. So basically, he asked about plausible and workable sandbox out there. So basically, if you go to my website, you'll see there's a bunch of sandbox that you can use. Maybe there's other sandbox that I'm not aware of. You basically have two options. You can implement your own automated sandbox in using Cuckoo Sandbox, which is free, open source. I actually use it in my Army service where I did the research and security stuff. And it's kind of helped me, to gain the first visibility and understanding of the malware. It actually also communicates with the virus total and brings you all the detections, all this kind of stuff. So if you want to do something locally, use a very strong server with SSD storage and whatever, a Xeon CPU, everything. At least 32 gigs of RAM because it takes a lot of resources. Basically, you can implement Cuckoo Sandbox. It will do an amazing job, but take into account there's a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of problems that you need to face, like Python shit and Linux shit and yada yada shit. A lot of shit, yeah. If you want to use a cloud-based sandbox, you can use AnyRun, which is amazing. From what I understood, it's Russian-based or something. I don't know. From what I heard, take care. Good luck. Don't put any personal information in your malware or something. You can use hybrid analysis and other solutions. Just go to Malware Analysis Co. You have their sandbox links. You can use all of them. Other questions? Thank you. You're an amazing audience. Thank you very much. May God bless you all. Thank you.